I'm Nintendo.
And I'm Sega. This is Console War! Looks like I owe you a Coke. Turns out, toothpaste does not work like regular paste. Also, we're out of toothpaste. What's with the piece of paper? You drawing that fruit again?
It's a bill for my car. I had to get new tires.
Well, that's because you keep off-roading. Your car just is not built for that.
And last month, I had a cracked windshield.
Because of off-roading.
And the month before that, the battery.
Again, the off-roading.
I can't keep spending money on this car.
Every time you off-road, your car gets damaged. I think it's obvious what you need to do.
Change my habits and stop off-roading.
No, this is America. You don't need to stop doing anything. What you need to do is get a horse.
A horse?
A horse.
Of course.
Yeah, that way you can pretty much go on any terrain, no problem. Horses can do that.
You don't gotta pay for repairs or anything.
All you gotta pay for is its food. And how much is hay really? I mean, it's basically grass. It grows everywhere.
I'm getting a horse.
You're getting a horse. It'll be like you're living in the Old West.
All the best things involve the Old West. Movies, TV shows, video games.
I love video games about the Old West. Red Dead Redemption, Oregon Trail, Sunset Riders.
Oh, I love Sunset Riders. For the Super Nintendo.
That's not as good as the Sega Genesis version.
Sunset Riders is a run-and-gun side-scrolling shooter game. It was developed by Konami and released for the arcade in 1991. Home versions were released for the Sega Genesis in 1992 and for the Super Nintendo in 1993.
The Super Nintendo version retained much from the arcade and is almost an identical port. The Sega Genesis version had many changes from the arcade, but still maintained many similar elements. So which game was better, the Super Nintendo port or the altered Sega Genesis version? Let's find out.
The Super Nintendo game looks just like the arcade.
These graphics are an identical port of the arcade. I've got everything. The same great looking characters, the same beautifully designed levels, and the same fluid animations. These spot on graphics definitely make the Super Nintendo the better looking game.
My game looks just as good.
There are differences in the layout of the Sega Genesis game, but still looks good. Good looking characters, good looking levels, and good looking character animations.
The Sega game is just as good looking. You're gonna have a tough time winning graphics.
Maybe I can help.
Who are you?
Really, come on. I have a hat and a star.
I have no idea who you are.
I got nothing.
Come on, fellas. I'm a cowboy.
Oh, okay. But why would a cowboy think they can help us out?
Are you kidding me? You're playing Sunset Riders, a game about cowboys.
Those aren't cowboys.
Yeah, they're bounty hunters.
Bounty hunters? But I had all these cowboy jokes. Brokeback Mountain jokes.
Brokeback Mountain jokes? Really?
Yeah, that movie's like 10 years old.
You know, a cowboy is practically a bounty hunter. I have all the same materials. The only real difference is a decision. You see? Watch this. I'm deciding all of a sudden I want to start hunting people. Now I'm a bounty hunter, you see? Wait. Now I'm deciding that I don't want to hunt people. Now I'm just a cowboy. See how easy that is? Bounty hunter, cowboy. On, off. It's just a decision.
I think you actually need to get bounties.
Well, can I stay here anyway? The bus won't be here for another hour.
What a character.
Character? That's it. Your game is missing half the characters.
The Sega game is missing so many characters. Half the players and half the bosses are missing. It can't be the best looking game with so few characters.
More doesn't automatically mean better.
Okay, you have more characters, but they all look the same. You just did a palette swap and hope nobody would notice. Changing the color of their clothes doesn't mean a better looking game.
Besides, your game is racist.
Racist? How?
The Sega game has a level where you fight Native Americans. This is taken right from the arcade. On Super Nintendo, the Native American level is still there, but no Native Americans. They've all been replaced by cowboys. That's right, people of color have been replaced by white people. First Hollywood, and now video games. The shame.
That's not racist. What's racist is keeping in the stereotype of the savage Indian.
Whoa, dude, not cool. Even I don't call Native Americans that, and I'm practically expected to.
Whoa, that's not what I meant, and you know it.
Alright, but other people have been changed in your game too.
Both of these games are loaded with working girls. The Sega maintains their saucy look from the arcade, but the Super Nintendo practically replaces them with nuns.
Alright, the censorship is a little ridiculous, but the Super Nintendo has the better looking game.
Side by side, the Super Nintendo is brighter and more colorful. And let's take a look at the enemy's bullets. On the Super Nintendo, they stand out on any background as they flicker green and purple. On Sega, they stay one color, red. The boss's bullets flicker red and brown, but in a game with red and brown backgrounds, it doesn't help. Bullets on a Super Nintendo are much easier to see and avoid. Also, Super Nintendo has more characters and levels. It gives the game a broader look that doesn't get repetitive or boring. For maintaining the excellent look of the arcade, graphics go to Super Nintendo.
The presentation on Sega is fantastic.
The Sega game has all these cutscenes before and after boss fights. I also have these impressive wanted posters of all the bosses.
My game has that too.
The Super Nintendo also has cutscenes before and after boss fights. And those wanted posters, they're here too.
But if you look closer, my presentation is better.
The wanted posters on Genesis move. They're blowing in the wind like a real wanted poster. The Super Nintendo posters don't move at all. And when you beat a boss in Sega, the background changes to a giant sheriff badge in the background. On Super Nintendo, the background doesn't change at all. It doesn't look as complete.
Those are really small differences. You're ignoring the obvious.
The first obvious thing is the Super Nintendo has way more cutscenes. You also get more story with the Super Nintendo. But the biggest difference is our openings. The Super Nintendo's game opens cinematically, just like the arcade game, with full animations. And the Sega game, it opens with nothing.
Whoa, I have something.
The Sega game does have something the Super Nintendo doesn't. Profiles of the main characters. It gives their full names and lists their favorite things. Do you know their favorite words? Because I do.
Nobody cares about characters' favorite words.
Favorite word? You know, my favorite word is, pop. Yeah, pop. It's such a good, well-rounded word with so many layers. It can be a person. It can be a drink. It can be a verb. You pop me like when you dance. It's got a bit of the, onomatopoeia thing going on. It is short, symmetrical. Yeah, pop. That's a good word right there.
My favorite word is jumbo. It's usually an adjective, but can also be used as a noun.
What are you doing?
Well, he was talking about pop, so I thought we were talking about our favorite words.
No, we were talking about presentation, and my game clearly has the best.
This is no contest. With more cutscenes and a phenomenal opening cinematic. Best presentation goes to Super Nintendo.
Do you have songs from the arcade?
Yep.
So I guess we better compare music. And we both know Super Nintendo has better quality.
The Super Nintendo has a wider range of instruments. The instrumentation makes it sound right out of the Old West.
Some of the songs sound pretty good on Sega too.
The drums on Sega sound much better. The melody comes out more clearly on Sega.
No way that sounds as good as my game.
Open your ears, it definitely does.
Fine, if we can't agree on music, let's compare sound effects.
Fine, let's compare voiceovers. The Sega game has a bunch of them.
That's a nice voice.
Those are mostly grunts. Now the Super Nintendo is loaded with voiceovers.
You would just trouble. We're gonna blow you away. You all right, man?
so you have more. My game still uses them better.
When you beat a boss in Sega Genesis, your character lets out a mighty cheer. This makes you feel good for what you accomplished. On Super Nintendo, when you beat a boss, sometimes your character lets out a weak yeah, and then pukes a little?
So one voiceover isn't great. The rest more than make up for it.
I don't know. When I get a bounty, I like to let out a proper cheer. Not a yeah and then a puke.
When have you ever got a bounty?
Well, just a few minutes ago, I got that bounty you had on your fridge. Go ahead and, check the bag in front of you.
He's talking about our grocery list where we wrote down bounty paper towels.
You're very welcome.
That doesn't make you a bounty hunter. It makes you a bounty purchaser.
And a bad one too. He got Grundy.
Well, I'll be. You know, they both begin and end with the same letter. That's just confusing. I bet you guys know what that's like.
Oh, that's true. You know, I mix up beer and butter all the time. What? It's confusing.
Well, you know it's not confusing. Who has a better sound? Because it's obviously Super Nintendo.
It has a solid soundtrack with that old western sound, but the voiceovers really sell this.
Marry me with my money.
They add charm and humor that is otherwise lost on the Sega game. Best sound goes to Super Nintendo.
These games seem almost identical when it comes to gameplay.
Both games play like Contra. You can jump, shoot in 8 different directions, and you die in one hit. You also have power-ups for 2 guns and a power-up for rapid fire.
Right, they seem similar, but there are differences that make my game better.
One difference is the rapid fire. In Super Nintendo, you need to tap a button every time you want to shoot. It's only when you get rapid fire that you can hold down the button and it fires automatically. On Sega, you can hold down the button to fire automatically right away. When you get the rapid fire, then the shot speeds up incredibly. Also in Sega, there's a button that lets you aim and shoot in any direction without moving. You can't do that on Super Nintendo. I have so many things that you can't do in your game.
Well, I have things you can't do in your game.
In both games, you can slide. On the Super Nintendo, it's easy with the push of a button. Since Sega only has 3 buttons, you have to push down and jump. This makes sliding more difficult to achieve. This can also lead to accidental slides when you mean to jump. It makes your game harder.
You're ignoring my 6-button controller.
Boy, am I glad you brought that up.
Even with the 6-button controller, it's still down and jump. 6 buttons doesn't work with this game.
The slide controls barely make my game harder, especially compared to your game.
The Super Nintendo game is incredibly hard. When you use up all your lives, the game makes you continue from the beginning of the level, at least in one-player mode. But when you lose all your lives in Sega, you continue right from the spot you died on. No starting from the beginning of the level there.
So it's a little challenging. Your game is definitely harder.
The levels in Super Nintendo are relatively short, so beating it in one continue is absolutely possible. This game is old school. Sure, you may die a lot at first, but you eventually learn patterns and proper attack methods. Using strategy and caution, you can beat it without losing a life. The same can't be said for the Sega game. This game is relentless. Enemies are constantly thrown at you. No time for caution or strategy when bullets are flying at you from every direction. And having hard to see bullets and objects doesn't make it any easier. The reason you continue where you die from in Sega is because the game is incredibly difficult, and beating a level would be impossible without it.
And I haven't even talked about the most obvious reason that my gameplay is better.
In Super Nintendo, you can play as all 4 characters from the arcade. On Sega, you can only play as 2. Checkmate.
Can you play as all 4 characters at the same time?
No, only 2.
Aha!
What aha? You can only play as 2 at a time too.
More playable characters doesn't exactly make your game better.
Granted, the Sega game only has 2 while the Super Nintendo has 4, but the extra characters don't add anything. I would understand how it would be a loss if they had different moves or different weapons, but they don't. Your extra characters use a Peacemaker and a Riot Gun, just like the 2 characters I have who use a Peacemaker and a Riot Gun. Having extra playable characters is nice if you want something different to look at, but it doesn't add anything to the gameplay.
Good point. But you're ignoring one thing.
If you play 2-player on Sega, one person has to have the Peacemaker and the other the Riot Gun. On the Super Nintendo, you can both have a Peacemaker or both have the Riot Guns at the same time. That's something you can't do on Sega.
Well, I have something you don't. A versus mode.
Want to shoot a friend Sunset Rider style? Why not play the Versus mode? Only available on Sega Genesis.
But that's the lamest versus mode ever.
What kind of versus mode only lets you pick 2 people? The most boring one, obviously. There hasn't been this few choices in a versus mode since Pong. Which one should I take, the left paddle or the right paddle?
You're just jealous. And I also have a bonus game you don't have.
The bonus stage on Sega has you getting 1-ups and points while you ride your horse. Loads of fun.
That's not loads of fun. The bonus stage on Super Nintendo. Now that's fun.
On Super Nintendo, the bonus stage plays like a shooter. It's a nice break from the intense action.
That's not a nice break. Riding a horse is a nice break. You're gonna need it after those boss fights, because they're really hard on Sega.
You want to talk about boss fights? Let's talk about boss fights.
Another thing the Sega game is missing from the arcade is all the bosses. The Sega game only has 4, while the Super Nintendo game has all 8 from the arcade game. And more bosses is definitely a good thing. The boss fights are the best part of the game, from their wacky personalities to how much skill is actually involved to beat them. Sure, enemies and levels you can plow through and never blink twice, but the boss fights require you to slow down and think of a strategy. If your strategy is to fill them with bullets as fast as possible, you will lose. You need to learn patterns, figure out weaknesses, and openings. With more bosses, playable characters, and better bonus stages, best gameplay goes to Super Nintendo.
Both games play well and are enjoyable, but only one game is better. And that game is Sunset Riders on the Super Nintendo.
It has better graphics with more levels and easier to see bullets. It has better presentation with more cutscenes and an amazing opening cinematic. It has better sound with good music and solid voiceovers. It has better gameplay with more playable characters and bosses. The Sega game is fun too. It looks, sounds, and plays fine. It's definitely worth checking out. The Super Nintendo game just has more of everything, and that can't be overlooked. Best Sunset Riders goes to Super Nintendo.
Hey fellas, I finally did it. I caught me one of them bounties.
What? You bring us some Scotch paper towels now?
Nice. What? No, not paper towels. A real person this time. One of the most wanted people ever. I present to you, Count Dracula.
Okay, but that still doesn't make you a bounty hunter. That makes you a monster hunter.
And plus, that's not even Count Dracula. That's Count Chocula.
Hello, happy to be here.
You're Count Chocula? Tarnation? I'll never get this bounty hunter thing down.
Do you have any cereal?
Why do people always want my cereal? Why can't people just be happy to see me? I'm just kidding. Of course I brought my cereal.
Yay!
Thanks for checking out our latest video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks to everyone who suggested Sunset Riders. There were a lot of you. And be sure to keep those other suggestions coming, guys. I promise we will get to them. And thanks to Xavior TheLycan for donating both the games to us. Also, why not check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for some behind-the-scenes stuff. Later.
Boy, am I glad you brought that up. Oh boy, am I glad you brought that up. Oh boy, am I glad you brought that up. Boy, am I glad you brought that up. I can't even do it.